joined by the other half of our broadcast today, Rick. Rick, how
Hi
you
there.
doing today?
We're doing great. Just watching this amazing finish down in Richmond, and excited to be on board with our first edition of Three Wide.
Yeah, for Martin Truex Jr., he's had 80 short track races in the Cup Energy or the Cup level. Was 0 for 80 on race number 81 for the short track. He got redemption. He's had a lot of bad luck and a lot of run-ins in the last few years, and for him to get this victory has got to be something sweet, especially to lock himself into the playoffs so early.
He needed this badly. It has been an interesting year for him. I think that at this point, he's back where he needs to be. I was always very concerned when he made the move to Joe Gibbs Racing as to what was actually going to happen with Martin Truex. Coming off of last year, I think this is really something that not only Joe Gibbs Racing needed, but Truex needed himself. I always kind of felt early in the season that with the incredible dominance by Kyle Busch that Truex was kind of forgotten in the shuffle, and this is wonderful to see.
Yes, yeah, this is establishing right here that there was nothing wrong with the 19 car last year, I think, for the last few years. But this also just goes to show, I think, how good Martin Truex Jr. and Cole Pearn do work together for them to pick up and leave the 78 team, even though there were similarities and they were working with essentially a Joe Gibbs Racing team to begin with, for them to pick up and move into a shop with three other teams plus 2 or 3 Xfinity teams. You go from being just focusing on yourself with the 78 car to now being, I don't know if it's distracted or being liquidated in attention. And for him to be running as strong as he has this year and to win by Richmond, I think really shows that the 19 team can and will be a playoff contender and can again continue their streak of deep runs into the playoffs.
And what's also interesting about that is it sends kind of a bellwether to the various Ford teams, namely Penske and Stewart-Haas, that Toyota is about much more than just Kyle Busch. So it's going to make the rest of this regular season extremely interesting, especially if Truex can start putting together great finishes like tonight.
Yes, absolutely. For Truex to move over and show this performance, I don't know if it's going to be more motivation for Kyle Busch. I don't know if he needs any more motivation to get up behind the wheel and do what he does best. But this, I think, is more of a reality check for somebody like Kyle, who for the last, I believe, 2 or 3 seasons hasn't had anybody to worry with as far as a teammate. Again, going back, Martin Truex Jr. has essentially been a teammate of Kyle's since 2016, but he hasn't been in the same house. And now if he continues this run, Kyle's going to start noticing other people paying attention to somebody other than him in the race shop. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see that kind of dynamic. Now he's got somebody to really look over his shoulder instead of just some team over in Colorado that they were shipping parts to.
Well, we saw that a number of years ago with Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson over at Hendrick Motorsports, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. So I think that internal team competition is a good thing. We actually saw that at our level a couple of weeks ago, where it's always fun to watch the drivers try to outdo each other, and that's good for the organization.
Absolutely. I think it can push that success, and I think we're seeing that dynamic right now work against certain teams. Most notably, in my opinion, Hendrick Motorsports. They don't have, other than last year with Chase's performance of 3 victories, but those were more or less victories that people expected from him. You don't see one driver taking charge, leading the pack, and then driving that whole team to increased success.
I think Hendrick Motorsports is in transition, and they have three very young drivers. They obviously have a 7-time champion who by the way put up a great performance tonight. I thought, I think uh, it is an organization that has reached the very top of the sport, stayed there for quite some time, and now is going through those growing pains of when you have young drivers. I think they're very solid with Chase Elliott. There's no question about it. He is going to be a dominant force in this sport for many years to come. Uh, but I do think this is in some ways a trial for both William Byron and boy, I'm having one of those senior moments now.
Alex Bowman.
Alex Bowman, and I just think what's going to happen eventually is Mr. Hendrick is going to have to make some real serious decisions regarding those two drivers based on performance or lack of performance. And, all good things come to an end. At some point, Jimmy Johnson is going to decide that it's time to go home and be with his family. And they have to think about how they would replace clearly one of the most dominant drivers to ever put on a fire suit and get into a race car.
Absolutely. I do think we are seeing a transition. The domination of Jimmy Johnson over the last, 16 seasons, 17 seasons, has been unfathomable, unimaginable. You could have never predicted it. They did an interview with Jimmy on XM earlier today saying, if we told you 30 years ago when you were still racing dirt or racing trophy trucks that this was going to be your future, would you have ever imagined it with all the success? And he said, absolutely not. There's no way. For him to have dominated the sport through essentially 3 generations of cars, numerous point system changes, as well as the addition of the playoffs and different stages and changing the way that points are scored in those stages. For him and his team, him and Chad Knaus, to adapt to all of those and still produce results year after year. Even though last year was a rocky year, they still fought through everything. And I don't know if we're going to see another performance like that. I don't think we're ever going to see another 5 in a row like we saw with Jimmy, let alone 7 championships with the same crew chief. I think right now the closest talent to that would be the guy in the 18 car, the Candyman. But that also brings up the question of, with the limited years that that the 48 car has with Jimmy Johnson in the seat, and with Chase, I agree with you. I think a lot of people would agree, being the future of that team. The question boils down to whether or not Bowman and Byron can either catch up or help the team move forward. And it also brings up the question, who's really on the hot seat first? It's very unlike Rick Hendrick to go and make a move on 2 drivers in the same year. Usually it's very unlike him to go through 2 drivers in successive years. I think the only time, or the last time we saw that was when he signed Junior to the 88 car, and then the following year he released Casey Mears and signed Mark Martin. But those were kind of moves that you saw coming 2 or 3 years down the road anyway. So it boils down to, I feel, who's on the hot seat first. On the one hand, you have Byron. You can give him a little bit of slack because of the inexperience. And then you have Bowman, who did race in the Cup Series for a few years and did have experience filling in for the 88 car and did show results in that. He had a dominating performance in the Phoenix race when he filled in. And kind of really hasn't been able to reproduce that, even though it's essentially with the same crew chief, Greg Ives, and it's with the same crew. Who do you think needs to step up in those 2 cars first to save their seat with Hendrick Motorsports?
I actually think it's Alex Bowman. Byron Byron has youth on his side. Um, he's in a position now where he's starting to learn the tracks. He's starting to learn the car. I think he has more time. Bowman, on the other hand, has been in the seat, both as a replacement driver and now as someone who is literally sitting in an iconic seat for Hendrick Motorsports. And Mr. Hendrick is usually very patient, bringing talent along. To his credit, he is clearly an owner who doesn't panic. He has that wonderful ethic that businessmen tend to have, which is, we're going to let this play out. We're not going to be overly patient, but we're going to let it play out. I think he's given Bowman that opportunity. I think Bowman has to show significant strides this year, or you are going to see him being phased out of HMS. Byron probably has another year.
Okay, so you're saying that you think Bowman, if he doesn't show improvement this year, is out next year?
I think that's a real possibility.
Okay, I could see it going that way. I see it maybe being this year is his, like we said earlier in the chat, or like I mentioned, I think this is his last year to audition for an extension. I think he might be signed in through next year. But I think next year you got to start looking at other drivers if he doesn't perform this year for the seat in 2021.
And Anthony, it used to be in this sport, silly season started right just before Halloween, kind of between Columbus Day and Halloween. That's not true anymore. Silly season is year round.
That's true.
And so I think if Bowman is still in the 88 next year, around this time next year, 8 or so races in, if there's not major improvement, you're going to start hearing that talk ramp up.
Yes, absolutely. But it is not unlike Rick Hendrick to make a official announcement regarding a driver change for the following year. Again, we got to treat Junior's announcement as an anomaly. It was Junior. They were going to make that announcement whenever they wanted. As far as his retirement, and also when they signed, it was right around a month or two's window during the season. I think Junior announced his retirement in April, and I think he announced his signing in 2007 with Hendrick for the 08 season sometime in like June. But I don't see Rick making an official announcement as far as driver changes until usually in the August or September areas. That's what he did with Casey Mears. That's what he did with Brian Vickers. He even made that announcement, I think, even with Mark Martin, when they decided they weren't bringing Mark Martin back and they were going to bring Casey Kane in, even though that was a full season in advance, and Casey needed that silly year with Red Bull, and he did win in that car. A lot of people forget, I think he did have a victory in that Red Bull racing car, so it wasn't a completely unproductive year for him. But yes, I think you're right. I think if he does decide to keep him for another year, you need to start looking for that driver now, and there will probably be rumors and stories stirring right around this time next year, if not already this year. He's already made that decision where maybe he's looking to bring in an Xfinity driver. Maybe he's looking at giving somebody like Justin Allgaier a shot, or maybe he's going to do the same thing he kind of did with Byron and bring Gragson up after just 1 year in the Xfinity series, if he can produce.
Exactly. And I think we're seeing a transition in the sport in general. I think that we're seeing a transition from the drivers like Jimmy Johnson and even Kevin Harvick at this point. It's funny that we're going to find ourselves saying this at some point in time in the not too distant future, that Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. are the elder statesmen in the sport, because there's so many young drivers that are they're working their way through the ranks that will be on the Cup level tracks very, very soon. It seems like this production of Cup drivers seems to be exponentially more rapid than it's ever been at any point in NASCAR's history. And we can discuss that on another show as to whether we think that's a good thing or not. I have my own doubts about the way some of the teams are bringing guys up too rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Some guys are can't miss guys. We talked about Chase Elliott.
Yes.
Chase Elliott's a great example of that. But I think some of the guys have been brought along a little too quickly. And truthfully, I think if you turn the clock back, 6, 7, 8 years, I think most people would have said at that time that Joey Logano was probably put into the 20 seat, prematurely. It's worked out well for him. I think he went to a great organization, and I think he's going to have some tremendous seasons at Penske. That's an organization, interestingly enough, that everybody should be watching, because they've got 3 drivers there who could put up some big numbers in terms of the numbers of wins, numbers of championships over the next decade or two.
Definitely agree. Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano have already proven that. I think Ryan Blaney is doing a stellar job in that 12 car as the third car for that team. I think they can and will be formidable. They've proven it so far this season. The 12 cars just had some bad luck. It seems like him and his crew just couldn't get on the same page for some reason this weekend. But then again, it just seems like it's Ryan that may not have had the track figured out. I think his average finish at this track is somewhere in the low 20s, if I recall. One of the broadcasters saying. So that's just, I think you could toss this weekend aside. Every driver has a bad track. And I do think that Penske can and will continue, especially under the guidance of Roger. They're not going to let the foot off the throttle, and they're going to be sniffing right on the necks of Stewart, Haas, and Joe Gibbs and Hendrick for years to come, especially that trio. I see that trio continuing for quite a while together and growing that team much stronger.
Speaking of young drivers, I wanted to get your take on what is going on with Kyle Larson.
It's funny. When he first came through the ranks in 2015, I believe was his rookie year, and then he got his first one in 16 or 17. When he was coming up through his first 2 years, and he would have those races where he would just flat out dominate or just be lightning fast and in the top 5 and then scrape the wall, or just the setup went away and they lost the race at the end just because they couldn't keep up with the track. You could see in his post-race interviews that it was more or less he knows he's fast enough. He knows he's got the talent, and it was almost like he knew but couldn't say that his team was holding him back, or the equipment, or whatever they were giving him. There was numerous occasions, I think, where he had either mechanical failures or even engine blow-ups beyond just a suspension failure. And he even alluded, I think it was the Coca-Cola 600 in 2016, I believe, after him and Chase had that lightning battle in the All-Star shootout. And he kind of just said, I know I've got it in me, I just need equipment that can do it. And I think he's kind of regressed back into that mentality, maybe not for the same reasons. I think that the Ganassi equipment is just as good as any of the other top teams. I think Kurt Busch is showing that. If Kurt Busch wasn't having the finishes he was and was finishing in the teens, then I think you could chalk it up to there's an issue somewhere in the Ganassi shop as far as not giving him the proper equipment. I think it's just a really big streak of bad luck combined with the package that they gave him this year. He's a driver that loves to have that power behind him, loves to be able to hang that right rear out just a little bit and create that air cushion on the outside wall going through that top line. And going to these 1.5 mile, 2 mile racetracks, he doesn't have the horsepower, I think, to be able to dance the car around with the throttle that he has in the past. I think a perfect example of that was Atlanta. In clean air, he was able to run wherever he wanted and pass, but even he said as soon as he got into the teens, the car just wouldn't go anywhere. And you see that echoed through a lot of drivers. They say the same thing. If the car's in clean air, the cars are amazing. Doesn't matter what you're driving. As soon as you get in that dirty air, no matter where it is, your car is not going anywhere unless somebody in front of you makes a mistake.
You know, it's interesting. We've just discussed a little bit about Kyle Larson. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got a couple of guys that are just having, I think, really, really good seasons so far, and that's Clint Boyer and Austin Dillon. You know, we talked a lot about you know who the top Chevrolet driver is, and these are tough days for Chevy. You know, how many races are we in so far? Is it 9?
I think this is the 9th race of the season. Yes,
we're 9 races, I believe. And this is what's really interesting. Only 2 organizations have won races this year.
That's true.
And Joe Gibbs. And so, you know, Chevrolet has not been at the top of the leaderboard at all this season so far, nor have you know, many of the drivers that we would have thought would have been consistently top 10 drivers.
Yes,
9 races in. So, you know, we're seeing a lot of speed out of Clint Boyer. We're seeing he ran a great race tonight. I actually thought for a while there he had something for Truex.
It looked like that, but I think that determination for Truex just wanting to get that first short track win, and then if people know the story behind that auto owner's paint scheme and the reason why that car is the color that it is because they're helping Sherry's foundation, I think, every time that Martin runs that car. So I think there was a little extra motivation underneath him to get that car in victory lane and to do that like he always seems to do in the most magical moments, whether it be the loss of a crew member back in 2017 or for Sherry's first race back, I think was the Coke 600 that he absolutely dominated. So I think he always seems to be able to reach back there and get that extra magic. Because I won't forget, with 34 to go, he started screaming on the radio that it was plowing worse than a Tonka truck. So for him to be able to hold off Joey Logano with traffic in front of him was nothing more than, I think, just sheer determination of trying to get that blue Toyota Camry in victory lane for Sherry.
As a bow tie fan, and as folks watch more and more episodes of 3 Wide, they're going to find out just how passionate the 3 of us are about Chevrolet. Austin Dillon seems to be putting up a tremendous season so far.
He's shown speed in every race. I did forget to talk about him. I apologize. But even in qualifying, in the first few races, I think it phased off a little bit. I think he regained some momentum in Richmond. But even in the first few races, there were times where he was top of the charts in qualifying trim during practice. And even in the first round or 2 of qualifying, he was right up there, top 1, 2, or 3. I think that Childress engines are starting to find their rhythm, especially now knowing that all these engines are using the tapered spacer and what they've got to work with. There were some growing pains in Atlanta. We know that he was having an issue with the fact that they brought a car that wasn't completely trimmed out when they felt like they should have. and the West Coast swing wasn't the best as far as I feel finishes for them, or as much as they or as high as they could have been. But you're starting to see that team as a whole improve. I think that the one thing that's holding that team back, in all honesty, is just Austin's attitude once anything goes wrong. It seems every other week he's on NASCAR Radioactive as a radioactive sweetheart candidate, just questioning his crew's ability if the slightest thing goes wrong. And I think if he can control that, we're going to start seeing some more strong finishes out of him and potentially even more victories out of him in the possibly by the end of this season.
You know, it's interesting you raised that point and the attitude of a driver when things start going wrong. We talk about that a lot in our little corner of the racing world, and we had that discussion multiple times a few weeks ago in terms of you never really get too high, you never really get too low. You have to keep your emotions under control. This is an incredibly, incredibly emotional sport. It isn't like, with all due respect to the folks that are going to wake up early in the morning to watch the last round of the Masters, it isn't like golf. There is emotion every single second, every single turn, every single straightaway, every single pit stop. It is really a sport that demands tremendous amounts of attention, discipline. I think I said to you guys a few weeks ago, I liken it to being martial arts on wheels. You have to stay very focused. And when a driver starts to lose that focus, that's when bad things happen. They just simply do.
It's absolutely 100% accurate. I think that goes for any level form of racing, as you've alluded to. It's F1 Rally, NASCAR, IndyCar, all the way down to what all of us do for Belltown Racing as far as go-karts. Any split second lack of focus or a mental lapse, you're not going to produce a result for that lap or that race. And you do as much as you need physical strength to be able to endure for that race and for that track and for that vehicle. Mental strength is one of the most underrated skills I think anybody has for the sport of NASCAR. First thing you hear whenever you tell somebody that you're a fan of the sport, they say, "Oh, well, yeah, it's it's a redneck sport. You don't need a long attention span. All they do is turn left, and you see them again in 30 seconds." It's like, no, you don't understand the concentration levels that those drivers need, especially at short tracks like Richmond and Martinsville, and then especially some place like Daytona and Talladega. I dare anybody to go out there and replicate those same exact results.
There's the argument that's existed for years about NASCAR drivers not being athletes. I'm sure you saw the same thing I saw earlier this evening. Jimmy Johnson's running in the Boston Marathon, of all things, on Monday. So I mean, if that's pretty demanding, and I don't know. I know we're a little bit closer where I live to where the marathon's going to be run. Believe me when I tell you, running from Hopkinton, Mass, into downtown Boston is incredibly demanding. Only a tremendous athlete could survive all of those hills, all of those valleys, the straights that they have to go through. When they get to Fenway Park, they think they're done, and they still have, like another good half a mile to go at least to get to the start-finish line. So anytime you hear that stock car drivers are not really athletes, I have to tell you, it is probably more demanding than almost any stick and ball sport.
I agree. For anybody and for anybody that follows sports in general, they've probably heard that the Boston Marathon is one of the hardest marathons in the world to run. And for somebody to go out there, run 400 laps at a short track, fly to Boston, maybe get, I'd say, 6 hours worth of sleep and maybe a bag of IV, and then go out there and run, 26 and a half miles and expect to finish it, I think he said, in about 4.5 hours. That's a pretty amazing feat for him to even attempt it, let alone finish it. And that shows, I think, above physical strength, that shows mental balls there.
And I will tell you, because when they mentioned it on TV, my wife and I looked at each other and said, I don't think Jimmy knows what the rest of us know, and that is it's going to pour on Monday. It is supposed to be torrential rain all day Monday here in southern New England and up in the Boston area. So he's got that to contend with as well. And they don't rain those out. So
no.
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
No, I think I got to give him all the credit in the world for attempting it, for going ahead and doing it. And I don't think there's a shadow of a doubt in my mind, unless he has some kind of like severe hydration issue, which he said that he's basically prepared for if it's 50, 55, 60, 65, 70 degrees, plus all ranges of humidity in between. He has a plan in his head of exactly what he needs to drink at each of the 8 stations. Like, this man even knows at station 1, station 2, whatever, if it's a certain temperature on his watch with a humidity level, he knows I need a cup of this or I need 2 cups of this. And he said that again in the interview they had at the beginning of the race on satellite radio. And I think for him to know and to remember that, and he's Jimmy Johnson and he's a 7-time champion for a reason.
Exactly. One of the things I wanted to talk about this evening was the issue that has dogged NASCAR universe all year long, for several years now, actually. That is the crowd tonight. What did you think of the attendance at Richmond Raceway?
I'll give Richmond somewhat of a pass, only because there was bad weather today. The one thing that's holding me back from giving them a complete pass is it's a Saturday night. It's not like you had a plan for an extra day. Like you were saying before we went live, it's a 51,000 seating capacity. It looked like there was about 30,000 in attendance. It's not like it's a Bristol Motor Speedway where it's not as densely populated around the track. There can be a lot of walk-ups to the ticket windows. The radio announcers were saying that there was only weather in the area until I think 1:30, 2 p.m. latest. The track was ready to race on by 4:30, 5 o'clock. If you lived in the area, and I would assume most of the fans that go to that racetrack, of the 51,000, probably a good half of them at least are from the local area, if not many more. And then there was a post that we had on Reddit that was very interesting, and there was quite a few people sitting in this area, and they all said the same thing, and I'm going to share that picture with you, with the audience now, is best seats in the house for the racetrack. That's for the Sunday race. And one of the other posts that I can't find said that, and the gentleman was sitting 2 seats to the left of this gentleman, $20 for that ticket. I can't see hotels being that expensive, and even if they are, if it's only $20 to sit that close to the track, I feel like there definitely should have been more. I can understand why they weren't sold out or filled to capacity at least. But for it to sound like there was only 30,000 tickets sold instead of 30,000 showed up from a sold-out ticket number, I think it's starting to show, especially in grassroots tracks like Bristol, Richmond, even Martinsville. They were not filled to capacity. There was a lot of empty seats. There was a lot more sheet metal showing in the audience than there was on the track. And I think that NASCAR needs to figure out a way to attract a younger crowd kind of like how myself was attracted to the sport in the early 90s, and now I am bringing my family into the sport. I think they're trying too hard to target the older or teenage to 20-year-old audience and not trying to attract the younger teen to adolescent that can then bring 20 years worth of fans into the sport.
That's a great point, and I think we will have an edition of Three Wide that addresses all of these concerns that the fan base has, that the sanctioning body has, that the tracks have, that the teams have, as far as why are these seats empty. We talked earlier tonight about the fact that yes, it's a capacity of 51,000 at Richmond, but Richmond is only 90 miles south of Washington, D.C., and easily accessible from Southern Virginia, by 95, I-95, from the Emporia area and the northern I-95 corridor of North Carolina. Only about an hour and a half drive, and equidistant from the Washington, D.C. area. So, if you're talking about an hour and a half drive, you might not even need a hotel tonight.
Right.
And as you know, I travel a lot for business, and spent my prior life spent 2 weeks a month on the road all over the country, and Richmond was one of the places that I went to fairly frequently. And there's everything in Richmond, ranging from top of the line Hyatt, Marriott, Hilton type hotels to very reasonable hotels like Hampton Inns and Holiday Inns, and the lower tier like the Super 8s and the Motel 6s and all that. There's a lot of opportunity for people to stay in the Richmond area. So I'm a little surprised at the crowd tonight, and it will be interesting to see how the next several weeks go. Next up on the calendar, next week is week off.
Yes. I believe. Yes, next week is off, and then I think they go to Talladega.
And it'll be interesting to see what the crowd is like there.
Agreed.
Because Talladega is a different animal entirely. If we see lots of empty real estate at Talladega, then we'll know we are in the throes of an economic downturn for the sport. How they fix it, we're going to talk about that in a future episode of Three Wide, with some suggestions as to what they might be able to do. But I thought it was interesting tonight. I expected more people to be there. I had been following the weather all day long and kind of saw that, things were changing. It was warm. It was in the mid 60s.
Yes.
I really thought they'd have a much bigger walk-up crowd. I really did.
Yeah, and the thing that makes it that shock factor of them not filling is that this was the only event that was on the track all day. You didn't have to be at the racetrack at 10 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock or 12 o'clock in the afternoon to enjoy the full day. This was the only event. At the very minimum, you had some fans that had the opportunity to probably walk the pits, which only opened at 1 o'clock in the afternoon today. And there wasn't anything going on. Like myself and you and our friends and family, we go to Pocono Raceway, and there's the last few years, there's qualifying on race day. So there is a reason to be there that early. And if there is bad weather, then yes, there's a reason to shy away from the racetrack. Today, all the bad weather started way before anybody had to show up to the racetrack. There was nothing going on at 3 o'clock when the rain stopped and the track started drying. So it is quite a tell on, I think, the fact that something needs to be done. And I think that a lot of people might have shied away just because of the product that they're putting on the track.
That's a possibility, and I think it bears greater discussion amongst us. I know that you've got a passionate fan base, and I know that the sanctioning body is wrestling with honoring its very rich history and taking the sport into the future. And there's a delicate balance there. And I think one of the things that tracks are experiencing right now is that delicate balance being challenged. Motorsports are different, Anthony. If when you're a young child, if you want to play soccer, you just have to get a soccer ball and just kick it around in the yard. You could, take a couple of garbage pails and make believe it's a goal. And, I'm going to date myself now, but you could run around the yard kicking the soccer ball and think you're Pele or Canalia or Beckenbauer. I don't know how much who they are today. I guess Ronaldo's one of the big guys today. If you're a baseball player, it doesn't take a huge investment. If you like baseball, you can go into your backyard, starting with, a wiffle ball set and pretend that you're Aaron Judge. But motorsports are different.
Absolutely.
If you the smallest investment really are video games. And once you buy the operating system, which is not cheap, you can play video games and get exposed to the sport. But to actually get in the seat of a vehicle is not an inexpensive thing to do. Even at the level, and we haven't talked a whole lot about our own background in motorsports, but even my exposure with my own child, it is not an inexpensive sport to get involved with at all. I'll share with the audience the kind of dollars and that we've spent that is not even based on owning the vehicle. It's actually based on renting the vehicle. So, there are a lot of challenges out there. You talked about, getting younger kids involved, and that would be wonderful, but it is not an easy sell.
No, it's not. It's hard to get somebody involved in the sport in that aspect. So I feel that the way to try to get them engaged, and we've had conversations about this, and I love the whole video game aspect. That's part of what helped grow my love for it. But what first caught my interest was the product on TV. Once I saw the product on TV, I wanted to be a part of it. I don't think you're going to get a kid that knows nothing about NASCAR or motorsports in general. You can say the same thing for F1, for motocross, for whatever type of motorsport there is out there. I don't think you're going to get a kid or a high percentage of kids that go into their local GameStop or Best Buy, have no idea what motorsports is, have no interest in it whatsoever, and you're not going to get a kid that goes in there and buys the latest NASCAR game, goes home, plays it, and falls in love with the sport. I think the audience or your fan needs to experience the sport itself first, whether it be from TV, getting them to the track. Obviously, the ultimate goal is to get your fans to the track. That's really the way that you make, I think, your biggest margin of profit with merchandise sales and hotels and tickets and all of that, vending. But I think you need to draw them in and gain their interest in the TV or the track product first, and then you can continue to grow their interest with something like a video game or something like a documentary, and then expose them to that. But like you said, to get them into it the way that you can get into a stick and ball sport like basketball or baseball or even hockey, and hockey is considered one of the more expensive sports to get into because of all the equipment you need to buy, because of all the traveling that's involved, even football. To get into it at that level of motorsports is not cheap on any level. Rick, I've experienced it just like you and Ben and Peter have. It's not cheap at all. At almost every story you hear from some drivers coming up is, look, my mom and dad sacrificed everything. My mom and dad sold everything just so I could make it to a race. And if we didn't make it to a race, we were screwed for the next week and we weren't going to race again. So yeah, you can experience it. It's just difficult to be in it. I think NASCAR needs to focus on getting them involved in participating in the sport in aspects other than getting people into the seat, but also focus on different ways of finding talent out there. And I think you're starting to see that trend with esports, with the simulations that are out there. And the fact that NASCAR right now seems to be very vested in the latest video game software and actually creating their own championship and even advertising it on some of the cars. Last week, Matt DiBenedetto had it on the hood of the 95 car, the NASCAR E-Heat or NASCAR Heat E Series. And then for the first few weeks, they even had it as a contingency sponsor on all 40 of the vehicles that were out there, advertising the E-Series that they're promoting.
You know, I think NASCAR, one of the things, and people tend in all of these talk shows and blogs and podcasts and whatnot, one of the things that people have done, at some level unfairly, is bash the organization of NASCAR for not putting out a great product. I will tell you, one of the things that they have done to near perfection is embrace technology. They have done an outstanding job of getting involved with the net, getting involved with social media. They have really embraced all of the things that young people embrace. And so, I think that they're in the right direction there. I think young people, it's funny. I joke with my son Ben all the time about, their whole world is Snapchat, which is something that lasts all of 30 seconds.
Yes.
So my world is a little bit different. It's we're dinosaurs. We still use, Facebook is new to us. It's something, and you talk to a very young person and yeah, they've got a Facebook account, but that's about it.
Right. That's the same with my mother. My mother has a Facebook account and doesn't even remember the password to it.
Well, we have had, and I'm looking at the time here, we have had a tremendous amount to discuss tonight. But one of the things we didn't talk about is who we are and why we're doing this. And the third member of our team couldn't join us tonight. I know he brings a really neat perspective because, which I hope he will bring to this forum. He's a school teacher. And so he uses NASCAR and motorsports integrating into many of his lesson plans.
Yes, and it sounds like he's created quite a few plans.
So this is just a really exciting venture for us. We as you had said in the actual introductory video, we started this just kind of chatting with each other, and now we're turning it into something that we hope will get us a good audience and get people to think a little bit about the various issues confronting the sport we all love, which should be an awful lot of fun for us and hopefully for the viewers as well.
Yeah, it's kind of more in the eyes of it was just a why not moment. We talk all the time about motorsports and life and everything in general. It's kind of like, well, if we're going to talk about it, why not press a button and have other people give the other people the ability to watch and participate? Because we know that NASCAR is a popular sport. There's a lot of fans. There's a lot of people that like to discuss the sport. So why not put it on a forum where we can invite other people to trip and stumble upon our channel and then participate and talk about it? So
Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Where do I begin? All right. So I'm Anthony. I'm 30 years old. I have a wife and a beautiful daughter, as well as another daughter on the way. She's due in June. Very blessed, very happy with my life. I'm pursuing a new career with New York City Department of Education as a paraprofessional. Um, so as far as my professional and family side, that's that. My hobbies, NASCAR. That's what it's been for the last 25 years. It's the biggest consistency in my life, and it's the sport that I've always loved. It's a sport that I've always followed. It's a sport that I've always wanted to be involved in any way, shape, or form. And it's brought me many, many memories, from just sitting on a couch and watching TV to going to events to meeting wonderful people like yourself, like Ben, Dorothy, Brooke, Peter, Chrissy. Anybody and everybody that I've ever really connected with in racing has been nothing but a blessing to me. So I have a lot to give and a lot to be thankful for as far as motorsports.
Well, for me, I am actually twice Anthony's age. I'm Rick. I'm the old guy. I'm here to bring a perspective of the history of the sport to the audience. My exposure to auto racing actually started as a young boy. There was a local short track that was about 10 miles from my parents' house, and on Saturday nights, I could always hear this huge rumble and roar of vehicles, and started going as a teenager and actually fell in love with the sport. I grew up a baseball guy. Spent a lot of years playing the game, coaching the game, coaching youth baseball, and I am married. Have a wonderful wife. She's been with me for 33 years and hasn't killed me yet. So I guess I'm doing something right. We are proud parents of one child, a 20-year-old guy who had an interesting introduction to NASCAR that I'm going to share with the audience. And Anthony, you've heard this story, and if you'll indulge me, our introduction to becoming a NASCAR family happened on February 18th, 2001. Now that probably means something to people. At least I hope it does. I think I got the 18th right.
Yes, yes, you did.
Our son's birthday is right around that date, and we were holding a family birthday party for him. The Daytona 500 was on in the background. We had about 30 people at the house celebrating this 2-year-old birthday, and you know how 2-year-olds can be. And so my parents, who were elderly at the time, didn't drive. They didn't live too far from us. So as the party ended and my wife started cleaning up the house and doing the dishes and all that kind of stuff, I drove my parents home. Now, the race was on in the background. We really didn't know what had happened that day. I came home and I said to my wife, "Where's Ben?" And my wife knew I was a big race fan. So I said, "Where's Ben?" She says, "He's in front of the TV." I said, "Oh, what's he watching?" She says, "Rick, I don't know how to tell you this, but something terrible happened at the end of the race today." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, some guy, Earhart, something like that, died." And I said, "The kid?" And she said, "No, not unless the kid's 50 years old." So I said, "Well, what's Ben watching?" She says, "Ever since it was announced that this man passed away, Ben can't tear himself from TV." And so it began for us as a family. And when he was 8 years old, he found a go-kart track and said, "That's what I want to do." And we haven't looked back since. Now he's racing karts. He's a proud teammate of Anthony's and Peter's. And he also races figure eights. He buys his own cars, puts them in the race trim, and races the fair circuit up here in Connecticut. So we've become a race family. Interestingly enough, my wife has become a racing mom. She, for months, wouldn't go watch him, and then found out that he was becoming pretty successful. and now she enjoys every moment watching him trackside, screaming and yelling like typical moms will. So that's our background in racing.
It's always good seeing Dorothy at the track. Yeah. Just real quick, my introduction actually to the sport, I will not forget. It was a Sunday in February. It was the early 90s. I think it was 90. It must have been 92 or 93. It was the Daytona IROC race. I'd never seen or heard of NASCAR ever. I just knew that I liked cars because that's all my uncle ever did was work on cars. And as a young boy, all you ever got was Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars. So sitting on front of the TV, and I guess my mother heard on the radio that there was a race on TV. So she flips the channel, and all of a sudden you see all these Camaros just going around in circles. And the thing that I fell in love with were the pit stops. When they would go in and you'd hear the air gun. That was a noise that I would imitate for years, and it would drive my mom crazy but make her laugh. And so it would do the same thing with my father, and it was just that air gun is probably the thing that drove me to love races, because for the first few years I started to watch racing was to hear the air guns.
Well, I'd like to give credit. I'd like to take the credit for this, but I can't. You've seen Ben's prowess on a racetrack.
Yes.
The credit, 100% of that goes to my wife, because she taught him how to go on two wheels to get him to school, because he's perpetually late for school. I wish Peter were with us tonight so he could talk a little bit about his.
I do too. I've always told him whenever we talk that he's got this uncanny ability. No matter how many different angles you're looking at something with the sport or with anything, he finds the one angle you haven't found and just blows the topic completely out of the water and just makes it this amazing, lengthy discussion that you have no idea that you're there for 4 hours. You feel like it's been 20 minutes.
We've got some exciting topics that we're going to be talking about during our broadcasts.
Yes.
In addition to the kind of wrap up to a race that we had tonight, we're going to be talking about everything from, as we started talking about tonight, why the seats are empty. We're going to be talking a little bit about the television coverage, radio coverage of the sport. We're also going to talk a little bit about whether NASCAR ought to, and the tracks ought to rethink what they are. Should they just be a track, or should they be actually a destination? And how that could potentially grow the sport. We'll talk a little bit about video games and how they impact what the rabid fan does. And of course, we'll be taking recommendations and suggestions from our viewers.
Absolutely. I think we're in a moment in the sport where it's growing, and we've got a whole bunch of topics, like you said, to talk about. We've got lists, and we could probably make brand new episodes based off of each topic, and we would never run out of topics or things or ideas to talk about.
That's the neat thing about this sport, is that you never run out of something to talk about. One of the things, and I know that you folks have been to a few tracks. We've been to several tracks. I'd like to do part of a broadcast just talking about the food at the tracks. As you know, I'm a bit of a foodie, so to talk a little bit about what we like, what we don't like, what we saw that was unusual, and then everything related to NASCAR. So this is really an exciting venture for all of us.
The beautiful thing is there's no pressure on this channel whatsoever, just because even if this channel didn't exist, we'd be talking about these things anyway. It's just the only difference is now we're doing it via web camera and in front of people rather than a private chat on Facebook.
Now, Anthony, tell our viewers how they can stay in touch with us through this channel?
The biggest and most important thing is to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon underneath the head banner. The bell icon will let you guys know exactly when we plan on going live. Like if we know and schedule an event, like one of these we can schedule for, say, Sundays at 9 p.m. And then you will get a notification to your Android or computer, wherever you have the YouTube app installed, and you'll get a notification that we're going to go live at a certain time, and then you'll get a notification when we go live. Every live broadcast has a chat that viewers can participate in. They can comment that constructive criticism, because again, we are a brand new channel, so we appreciate any help we can get from any sources whatsoever. And they can also shoot questions and maybe even topic ideas, and we'll take them into consideration and probably talk about them. So the biggest thing right now is to subscribe if you come across the channel and hit the bell icon, just to get the notification. I think in the future, once we grow an audience, I think what we can do is we could create like a Twitter account just to have some other form of communication for people to reach us without us being live. And then, but that's further on down the road. I think right now, if you find our channel, just hit the subscribe button. There's no harm in trying and watching us. All we're going to do is talk about a sport that you came across and searched for.
And one of the great things that's going to happen on this channel is we're going to talk about the sport constructively. This is not designed to bash the sport. It is not designed at the same time to be, a shill for the sport either.
Right.
To look at these topics objectively, to give credit where credit is due, to criticize when it is appropriate, to be respectful, obviously. One of the things about this sport that's a little bit different than the stick and ball sports, the inherent danger of the sport requires, I think, people to look at the participants, the crew members, the folks that are coming up over the wall with a level of respect that you would afford your own family members, because after all, NASCAR really is one big family.
Absolutely. I think that's something that is vastly underappreciated, especially when you hear from some people that may not be familiar with the sport. Oh yeah, I watch the sport for the crashes. Well, they don't realize that those crashes hurt no matter what speed they're going. Those drivers hurt for a few days after that, or a few weeks after that. We've known many great drivers, especially the one image that stands out is Davey Allison in the early 90s. Had that really bad crash. I think it was at Pocono. Cracked a few ribs, went right back in the car the next week with a flak jacket to make sure that those ribs didn't shift on him. And I think he won the race.
So obviously respect for the sport that we love is important to us, and we hope that comes through in the way we present our broadcasts.
Absolutely. And if we can create a new fan here or there along the way, that's just an added bonus. We're here to discuss with current fans and also encourage people that may not know about the sport to just sit and listen in and maybe explore a race on TV. It's free. You already pay for the cable.
Well, it's been an exciting start to this.
Absolutely. I can't wait for the next one.
We will have to talk about that.
Yes. Yeah, we'll be working on a schedule for sure, a set schedule. This was a very quick impromptu one, just because I think of the fact that it was a Saturday night race as opposed to a Sunday race, but I needed time to kill before the Chinese Grand Prix at 2:00 in the morning over here.
You're worse than I am.
I'm bad. I am bad. When it comes to F1, I mean, NASCAR is my number one love, but F1, 2 a.m., all right, yeah, no, it's okay. I just made my cup of coffee to make sure I make it there.
Well, I'll tell you, you enjoy the F1 race.
I will, thank you.
And we will catch up with the next broadcast. And what is it that you say?
if the spotter doesn't tell you that you're clear, just remember you're 3 wide.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Have a good one, guys.